Welcome back to Sports Nerds in the Morning. We have an exciting show today for you guys. We're going to be talking some baseball. We have a special guest, Mr. Tim Kurkjian, ESPN baseball analyst and writer. But before we bring Mr. Kurkjian on the phone, we're just going to introduce ourselves as usual. I'm Caleb Posner.
I'm Elon Berger.
I'm Josh Golden.
I'm Jordan Goldman.
And we're just going to kick right off with the fact that pitchers and catchers are reporting soon. And basically, the offseason's as slow as we experienced last year. It's really quite interesting to see that the MLB offseason has shifted from what we used to see as an exciting offseason to two of the biggest free agents not off the board yet. Josh, what do you really think of this?
Well, I think it's obviously fascinating to see that these two big free agents, Manny Machado and Bryce Harper, haven't signed yet. But what's really fascinating to me is that both of these guys have been talking about potentially coming to San Diego and playing for the Padres. Obviously, we don't expect both of them to come to the Padres, but I think it looks like it's a possibility that one of these guys can end up putting on a Padre uniform in 2019, and I think that would just be insane to watch.
For me, it's really interesting bouncing off that, not just the Padres rumors that are bouncing around, but the mystery that surrounds these guys. Just the other day, I heard the floating around that Harper, or there's a couple teams out there trying to sign him to a short-term deal versus the long-term mega million deal that he really wants. So it'll be fascinating for me to see how it really all plays out, especially when no one even knows what Harper wants to do. Does he want this big contract, which is what he said he wanted, or is a team really going to come out and give a short-term big money offer to let him come out and prove himself? Because his season last year was not MVP caliber.
I agree. I think it's definitely more likely, though, that Harper ends up a long-term deal for a lot of money. His agent, Scott Boras, who's, notorious for having guys wait this long to sign with a team. And it'll work out good for Harper in terms of money in the long run. But for now, we're just waiting.
Yeah, I had a conversation with Jake actually about this about probably a month or two ago. We were talking about Bryce Harper really should sign a 2-year deal. It sounds like the smart idea for him because he hasn't been as productive as he asks for money-wise, like in the last couple of years. And if he signs a 2-year contract, he'll be a free agent in 2021. The 21 free agent class is a bit on the lighter side compared to the last couple of years we've been seeing. If he has the 2 years that he expects on this 2-year deal, he'd come out in 2021 and easily get the money that he wants.
I agree with you, except for the fact that you never know what's going to happen in sports.
Correct, but he'd be gambling on himself.
Exactly. It would be gambling on himself, and does he want to do that when... Look, obviously he wants this $300 million contract. That was what had been thrown around. And now he really, is coming out in possibly $250. So it's less than what he wanted. But ultimately, I just think that these guys, him and Machado, are going to have to take quote-unquote less money. It's still big money. And sign somewhere because none of these teams are willing to pay what they want.
For sure.
Absolutely.
And really, on that note, we are pleased to introduce our guest for today, Mr. Tim Kurkjian.
Hello, Mr. Kurkjian. It is an honor to have you on this episode of Sports Nerds in the Morning. How are you doing today?
Well, fellas, how you doing?
Doing good.
Doing pretty good.
So our first question we would like to ask you is, so we all know the backstory behind how you met our awesome journalism teacher, Mr. Black, but would you like to elaborate for our viewers how you got connected with our teacher?
Well, I hope I've got this right, but I think he read a story that I wrote for ESPN.com years ago about how I cut out every box score of every game for 20 straight seasons, never missed a day cutting out the box scores. And I think he was so struck by that he got in touch with me by email somehow, not sure how, hardly important. And then he asked me in our little email back and forth what my favorite box score was, since we have a love of box scores. So I told him, well, the 30-3 game that the Rangers and Orioles played in 2007 has to be one of my favorites. And then I didn't hear from him for a while, and about 6 months later, a gigantic package arrived on my front doorstep. I could barely pick it up. And I opened it up, and I kept looking and thinking, what is this? like a 6 foot by or 5 foot by 7 foot gigantic box score of that 30-3 game, and it had come from Christopher Black. And I was so appreciative that anyone would take the time to send me something like that. I put it in my office where it still sits to this day, although it's over 10 years later. I look at it every single day. And just recently, I bought a box score from Christopher Black of a very important game in my family's history. My daughter scored 22 points in her first high school basketball game many years ago. She scored them on my birthday in the gym that I used to play in high school, and I gave her that as a Christmas present, a total surprise, and she cried on Christmas morning, all because Christopher Black explained to me that I can make box scores for people, and I just think that's the coolest thing.
I absolutely agree, and I think
definitely awesome.
For us, it was amazing because Mr. Black walked into our journalism classroom and was like, guys, you are never going to believe what happened. And lo and behold, told us the story. And really, for us, we've always been supportive of his box scores thing because we've been diehard sports fans, that we've been friends for a really long time. And for us, it's been so cool to see him transform the box scores into something that we all just love to see. For me, I bought one for my mom's birthday of Trevor Hoffman's 500 save. We had season tickets for like a while to the Padres, so that was really meaningful to me. But we love Mr. Black and think it was so cool that he was able to like do that for you and is able to do that. So really just amazing kind of story.
Right. Well, again, box scores are so important to the fabric of baseball. There's so much you can learn by looking at a box score, and it's just a beautiful thing to look at it. And if it has any real personal value, like your first major league start or the no-hitter you threw that night in Kansas City or whatever it is, that makes it even better. And that's why I think his idea to create box scores for people like you did for me and for my daughter is brilliant. And it probably won't be the last time that I come to him and say,
definitely,
help me out with a box score.
Exactly. That's the beauty of it. You can come up with so many different things that have so many different awesome values to a lot of people. Like you can get something like that that's cool for your daughter, or you can get a memory from a professional game you went to. It's really an amazing thing.
Absolutely.
All right.
So shifting more towards kind of our big thing with us is, if you haven't been able to tell, we're diehard San Diego Padres fans. It can be difficult at times, but for us, we always hear these rumors. It's like the Padres, well, in the last couple years, the Padres are in on Eric Hosmer. The Padres are in on Bryce Harper, Manny Machado. And we never believed it until they actually signed Hosmer. It had been a history of the Padres just going out and saying they're in on guys and refusing to pay guys big money, and always just frustrated us as fans to never be able to, go out and really make a splash in the free agency market. So when it comes to that, what do you think about the off-season rumors surrounding the Padres and what they might look like in 2019?
Well, I'm not shocked that the Padres name came up with Harper, Machado, and really anybody else. The free agent situation has changed so dramatically in the last 2 years that none of us should be surprised by anything anymore. Now, I don't think Harper or Machado is going to end up with the Padres. Not because there's no reason to go there. It's because I think somebody else is going to have more money. But if you're the Padres and you're trying to build a winner, and Eric Hosmer is one of the first building blocks, and you have all these young players, including Fernando Tatis Jr. coming, you need more good veteran players. That's why Bryce Harper especially really fits in San Diego. The question is, do they have enough money to afford him? How much is it going to cost? And just as important, would Bryce Harper or Manny Machado want to come there? And that is a big question. But if nobody else is offering a perfect deal, if some of the bigger market teams, say the Yankees and the Dodgers, are indeed not interested, it's not out of the realm of possibility that one of those guys ends up with the Padres, and yes, that would be an enormous boost for the franchise.
Absolutely.
But I must tell you, we're over 3 months into this negotiating period, and really, how much do we know in concrete terms about what is going on with Machado and Harper? We don't know very much, because I don't think anybody else knows very much, and that's a lesson for all of us to learn. The free agent market has changed, and I don't see it coming back anytime soon.
Exactly, Mr. Kurkjian, that brings up a question that I wanted to ask you. So what do you really make of the fact that pickers and cackers are reporting 1 week from today, and the top 2 free agents that have been on the market this season that we've been looking at and expecting to be signed and getting these big contracts for years now, for the second year in a row, the top 2 free agents haven't signed heading into spring training, and how do you think this is going to affect free agency in the years to come?
Well, I think we saw a sea change in this last year, and to repeat, I don't see it coming back anytime soon. We have a new legion of young, brilliant general managers who are also remorseless, bloodless, emotionless, and they have created a value structure that says if you don't fit into this value box that we've created through sabermetrics and other avenues, we're just not going to sign you. I believe, for the moment at least, the days are over of a general manager in his 60s saying, I had this guy in St. Louis, he's a winner, I'm going to give him a couple extra years and a bunch more money, and we're going to bring him in. I think those days are over. And what I know are over are the days that a 32-year-old outfielder who is on the decline, especially defensively, who doesn't get on base like he used to, he's just never getting a 4-year deal for $75 million ever again. Those days are over. And that's what everyone needs to understand. And yet I thought all those guys would have trouble getting signed this year, but I thought Machado and Harper were in a different category because of their age, their talent level, and their track record. And I've been wrong again, because they are having a hard time finding a job that fits with what they think their salary structure should be.
Do you think that because of that teams are starting, like the Padres, for example, are starting to just bank on not getting free agents and starting to just cater what they want to do going forward? Because, we've heard the phrase hot talent lava as San Diego fans for a couple years now. Do you think that's enough to win with just hot talent lava? Or do teams need to start having those general managers again who are willing to bring in winners in order to win and just transition into competing going forward?
Well, I love young talent, and I don't think there's any doubt the way to win is to develop your own, as the Cubs have done with Javi Baez and Chris Bryant, as the Astros have done with Correa and Altuve. That's clearly the way to go. But this thought that you can do it by yourself, and you don't need some veteran with a great track record who can help lead, who can tell the young guys when they go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts. This stuff happens all the time. It has to be a blend. It has to be more, especially for the smaller market teams like the Padres. It has to be more of your homegrown young talent. But there has to be a blend, and that's why Eric Hosmer was brought in. And maybe you need one more. But you're not going to do it just with the young guys. The game is just way too hard to play. And in the end, one reason the Astros won the World Series 2 years ago is they brought in Justin Verlander and said, help us, help the young pitchers, help our young hitters, help be a leader for a team because you've been there before.
For sure. As we're on that note of guys who, maybe haven't been thought about so significantly during the offseason, or such as Verlander, who was a veteran guy, hadn't had the best years of his career in the last couple of years. It seemed like his prime was behind him, but the Astros made a move and they knew he could help them. What are some guys in free agency right now who could help a team out that may be flying under the radar?
Well, I have to think Dallas Keuchel could really help any major league team. But if he's going to want over $100 million, he just might not get that because, again, these young GMs are saying that's too much money to pay a pitcher of his age. Greg Kimbrell is a dominant closer. And yet, he's not going to get 6 years from somebody. He's not going to get 5. He might not even get 4. So there are plenty of guys out there that can really help major league teams, almost any major league team. But if they think that our young GMs are going to look back and say, yeah, we're going to start doing things like we did 5 years ago, when, let's face it, some real mistakes were made 5 years ago, they're not about to repeat those mistakes. So all of these free agents who are a week away from pitchers and catchers reporting and don't have a job, they're worried. And they should be worried because they're going to have to lower their demand to get to get a big league job in 2019.
So do you think we're going to see a shift in mentality of GMs willing to sign guys, or a shift in the players just having to get a job first?
I think the shift has to come for the players now. Let's just use Nolan Arenado as an example. He's a great player. And if he went out on the free agent market, he would get an enormous sum of money. Enormous. But that's what we said about Harper and Machado, and it hasn't happened yet. So maybe if I'm Nolan Arenado, and I'm just using him as an example, I might say, hey, free agency is not what it used to be. It's not the way to make the money that you need or you want. So maybe I should sign long-term with the team I'm on. Maybe free agency isn't so great anymore. And maybe that's where the players are going to start to make the adjustment that when their parent team, the one that, say, drafted them and developed them, says, we want to keep you long-term, maybe that's the way to go. I know there are a lot of serious discussions going on at the union right now about what are we going to do about this. Maybe one piece of advice is to advise the players, if they're offering you a really big long-term deal to stay and avoid free agency, maybe we need to think about that much more seriously now.
Definitely. So you bring up an interesting point that a lot of these guys are going to want to just avoid free agency and sign a long-term contract with the team that they're on. But for example, let's say that they don't really love the team that they're on so much. So do you think down the line you could start seeing things that are starting to happen in the NBA now, like guys demanding trades to these certain teams, potentially happening in baseball? Like, let's say Nolan Arenado says, I want to sign a long-term contract. I don't want to have to deal with free agency. Trade me to this team. I don't want to deal with you guys anymore.
Well, it's certainly possible, but I think baseball and basketball are distinctly different sports because LeBron James touches the ball on every possession.
Exactly.
He affects the outcome of a game every single time he steps on the court. He's the best player on the court every time he goes out there, and he's the focal point of every game. It doesn't work that way in baseball, and I just can't see Nolan Arenado saying, send me to the Yankees, and 4 days later he's on the Yankees. Now, that would have happened 20 years ago when George Steinbrenner was the owner, but those days no longer exist in this respect, where I just don't think our young GMs are going to allow something like that to happen. There are no more gentlemen agreements out there that say, hey, this is, I'll help you out here, or I'll take the player, and me out down the road. I don't think our cutthroat GMs, and I mean that in a good way, I don't think they're willing to do a deal like that as willing as they are in the NBA.
And that to me is something I love about baseball, which is
Exactly.
the NBA is starting to become a league that is some referring to as toxic. And in baseball, it just seems that you see a little quote-unquote diva incidents happen here and there, some actually with Machado last year in terms of his hustling. But ultimately, baseball has kind of stayed away from this trend we're starting to see in the NFL too now, with Le'Veon Bell demanding money or he refuses to play for his team. And baseball's kind of stayed clear from that path of the athletes holding all the power of where they end up. And the GMs in baseball seem to have more power than some of the GMs in other sports, which I think is very interesting for the game going forward.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And it goes back to the point I made about LeBron James. Mike Trout is the best player in baseball, period. I'm not even sure there's a debate there. But he does not affect the outcome of every game like Kevin Durant or Steph Curry does. He can only do so much, batting 4 times per game. Max Scherzer doesn't pitch every game. He only pitches every 5 days. And therefore, the power that our baseball players have isn't nearly as great as the power that our basketball or our football players have. Tom Brady touches the ball on every offensive possession. But Mike Trout, on a certain day, might go 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts and not even catch a fly ball in center field. And people would ask, how important was he today? Well, the answer is he's not as important as a basketball player, and that's why they have more power over things than baseball players do. Don't forget, Alex Rodriguez, Ken Griffey Jr., and Randy Johnson were all gone from the Mariners when they went out and won 116 games. And those are 3 of the greatest players I've ever seen. But they left the team, 3 superstars, and the team still won 116 games. It simply doesn't work that way in basketball and football.
Absolutely. So just another quick question for you here, kind of on a sort of separate note. Like I said earlier, we're approaching spring training now. We've got 7 days until pitchers and catchers are reporting. So who are some players heading into spring training that you'll be paying close attention to in the next few weeks? Not necessarily in the free agent market, but on a roster headed to spring training who you could see making a huge impact.
Well, I'll be interested to see, like, Shohei Ohtani, exactly how healthy is he? The Angels have made it clear he's probably not going to be with their club on opening day as a pitcher or a hitter, but it'll be fascinating to see how healthy he is coming back from this, how the Tommy John surgery will affect his swing, and when he will get back on a mound again. My guess is it's not this year. Didi Gregorius of the Yankees, a critical piece to their team. I will be watching him early on to see, will he be back in May, will it be in July? I'll be interested to see exactly how the Cardinals react to having a new star first baseman in Paul Goldschmidt and what he does for that lineup and for that infield defense. I'll be interested to see what Yasiel Puig does in a completely different environment in Cincinnati than the one he grew up in L.A. I'll be fascinated to see how all these newcomers on the Mets, most notably Robinson Cano, how they make all those pieces work. This is why spring training is so great, is that there is a storyline every place you look, and this spring is no different.
I absolutely agree, and it's, again, one of the reasons I think that we keep coming back to just what makes baseball so special to us on this podcast, and obviously to you who's been in the industry in the game of baseball involved for such a long time, is that there's just so many aspects, and obviously each sport is unique, but that set baseball apart, and I guess its pureness. And one of them to me is spring training, which the NBA Summer League doesn't have the big connotations that spring training does. The preseason, the NFL, no one cares. Some people even want to get rid of it. But spring training in the MLB, fans are excited for pitchers and catchers to report. They want to see their team shape up. They want to see these young guys come out and who's going to make the roster. I think that ultimately it's where baseball sets itself apart in terms of the game starting early and just in terms of baseball being something that we as fans appreciate and that's just such a pure sport. And I know that Josh had a question talking about, I guess, the pureness of baseball.
Well, not necessarily just the pureness of baseball, but the pureness of everything, really. Just as we're progressing and we keep going, do you see this game sort of shifting to not as pure as we've seen these other sports transitioning? Like we talked about how the NBA is changing, how the NFL is changing, how it's sort of adapting to give players more power and just things aren't looking like they used to be 10, 15 years ago. Where do you see the game potentially changing in the next decade or two, and how do you think that'll affect the purity of the game?
Well, to me, it will always be the best game. It will always be the purest game. Its history and tradition will always be better
Absolutely.
and richer than any other sport.
Couldn't agree more.
I am worried about where the game is right now in the actual playing of the game. And don't get me wrong, I love to go to baseball games. Nobody loves it more than I do. But we have too many strikeouts in today's game. We have too many walks and we have too many home runs. And we don't have enough in between. The real greatness of the game to me is the defense you see by these brilliant middle infielders and these incredibly graceful center fielders, let's say. And we don't get to see them make enough plays because we average 17 strikeouts per game. To me, what has to happen in baseball is we have to get back to a little bit more of how the game was played, say, 40 years ago when I first started covering, where striking out was embarrassing. Now it is totally accepted. Back then, we didn't run a shift on every play, and now we do. And there's a way to beat that, but it's going to take an enormous adjustment by our pitchers who are going to have to get it through their head that throwing 100 miles an hour is not the end-all, be-all. You got to learn to get people out, and striking them out is not the only out on the field. More important, we have to make an adjustment for our hitters. They are going to have to understand that putting the ball in play is way more important than trying to hit a home run and striking out as many times as they do. We had 151 guys strike out 100 times last year. That's way too many. We had a total of 60 from 1900 to 1960 combined. We used to average one 100 strikeout hitter per year, and now we average 150 per year.
Wow.
This is where the change, to me, has to come, and I think the change has to start literally with our 10 and 12-year-olds. And we're going to have to tell them, look, the goal is not always to get the ball up in the air and see if you can hit it over the fence. The goal is to hit the ball over there once in a while, to hit the ball on the ground over there once in a while, to learn how to bunt a ball, to learn how to get a ball in the air when there's a runner on third with less than 2 outs. And that adjustment is going to take years and years to happen. And I hope it does. But it can't just happen in 1 year. That's a huge adjustment.
For sure. I agree with you, Mr. Kurkjian. I think it definitely needs to start at the earliest levels of baseball because, you know, you get to the MLB and guys are throwing as hard as they can and players just want to hit a home run. But on the topic of that, this year we saw Mariano Rivera enter the Hall of Fame as the first unanimous player ever, a guy who is almost undoubtedly the greatest closer of all time. Were you surprised to see that he was unanimous, or were you surprised that there hadn't been any unanimous players prior to that?
Well, I'm always shocked that he's the first one. I mean, there were at least 50 to 75 players who should have been unanimous before Mariano Rivera. And yes, I was mildly surprised that 424 voters all checked the same box. And I think it's great. I think it's about time. And I think it's time to change the subject. And I think he deserved it. What struck me as a little bit odd and a little confounding was how people seem to make a point that Rivera didn't deserve this when he clearly deserved it. But nobody is saying he's the greatest Hall of Famer ever now and the best player ever to go in the Hall of Fame because he was the first unanimous choice. Nobody is suggesting that he was a better baseball player than Willie Mays because he's not. You can't compare a closer to an everyday center fielder.
Of course not.
But you can say he's the greatest closer of all time. There is not a close second, and he deserves every bit of his unanimous choice. And I'm so happy that finally we can talk about something else now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's always been funny to me to just see the Hall of Famers that roll in and kind of be shocked, like, you really couldn't put that guy in unanimously. And I think it's a perfect point. It's not that Rivera is the best Hall of Famer out of anyone. It's just astonishing that even going back to Babe Ruth, how a guy like Babe Ruth, who was leagues ahead of the rest of the competition at his time, didn't even get in unanimously. And since then, the numbers of players that were never able to achieve that unanimous status. And although it pains us as huge Trevor Hoffman fans say that Rivera is undoubtedly the greatest closer of all time, Hoffman being second, but I completely agree with you. I think that it's just finally a positive thing in terms of moving forward with Hall of Fame voting, that the first unanimous guy is over and we can just start talking about who's not who's going to be unanimous, but who just deserves to be in the Hall of Fame, period.
Right, and we have too much discussion anymore about the votes and the voters instead of the people who actually get in the Hall of Fame. The discussion this year should have been entirely about Mariano Rivera, and yes, 100%, but the rest should have been about how great Mike Messina was, and Edgar Martinez,
Absolutely.
and Roy Halladay. But instead, there was too much discussion in my mind about who are the voters? Why did the vote go this way? It's more about the players who get in rather than the people who vote them in.
For sure. And besides Rivera, I mean, the Hall of Fame class this year is, I mean, every year it's incredible. It's the Hall of Fame. But this year is, to me at least, really special. I've always thought Edgar Martinez deserved it. I'm glad he got the bid. And Roy Halladay really, I think, will be a very meaningful induction this year.
Absolutely.
With the events that obviously unfortunately occurred with his untimely death. And I just think that the discussion shouldn't be exactly what you said. It shouldn't be about these votes, who's voting, why it's unanimous, but more about the careers these guys have had and celebrating their legacies at Cooperstown.
And I hope that changes as we move forward here. But again, it just troubles me that again this year, instead of discussing the four guys who got in, there was just as much discussion about Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens not getting in. We need to change that narrative at some point also.
For you with the Hall of Fame, I've been to Cooperstown, and I mean, for me, it was just being a huge baseball fan, one of the most meaningful experiences I've had, getting to see Tony Gwynn's plaque in person and just walk the streets of baseball legacy and see these shops with tons of memorabilia. Was there one year of Hall of Fame induction that was very meaningful for you?
Well, I've been to about 15 inductions, but the Tony Gwynn Cal Ripken one was my all-time favorite. Not just because those were two guys I admired so much. I covered baseball during their entire career. I knew each one of them. I know Cal Ripken exceptionally well. I knew Tony Gwynn exceptionally well. It was the biggest crowd they've ever had at Cooperstown And I think the most important thing was just the feeling around the beautiful little town that week because they knew who was going in. Not that they were the two greatest Hall of Famers ever, they're not. But because nobody played the game the right way better than those guys did. And they both stayed their entire careers with one team, and that was really important to them. I'm sure they both left a lot of money on the table to have some sort of loyalty to their hometowns. I'm not sure we're ever going to see another year in Cooperstown history like Tony Gwynn and Cal Ripken, given everything they stood for, especially the loyalty to their team and their towns.
There's a reason we love our Mr. Padre.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So as we begin to wrap up here, I want to ask you, Mr. Kurkjian, as a group of young journalists in high school, it's an incredible opportunity to be able to speak with someone like you who's achieved so much success in this field. Do you have any advice to journalists like us who may be going to college soon, study journalism, and have aspirations to be the kind of reporter that you've been through your career and are just trying to do a podcast, write about baseball every day because it's something we love? What advice do you have for kids like us?
Well, the first thing you have to do is you have to learn how to write. I've never met anyone in my business, as writers, of course, TV people, anybody who couldn't write. It's the most important thing. Everything that I do on television now, I can do, and on radio, because I learned how to write. And by the way, I wrote in high school for my high school paper, and I was terrible. One of my gym teachers told me once after one of my stories, he said, that might be the worst story I've ever read in our school paper. And he said, I hope you're not planning on making this your life's work. and that's exactly what I did with making my life's work. But I got better. So if you guys or anyone else of your age is struggling with your writing, I am walking, talking proof. You can get better at this. It's like anything else. If you want to be a great free throw shooter, you have to shoot a lot of free throws. If you want to be a great writer, you have to write all the time. That's obvious. Secondly, you have to be curious when you go to the ballpark or wherever you are. You have to look around, keep your eyes and ears open, and constantly ask, like, what is that? What happened over there? What happened on that play? Why did that guy say that? Why is he playing over there? If you keep asking questions like that, and then go to the people who actually play the game and say, in the fourth inning there, this is what I saw. Did I see this the right way? Or tell me what happened on that play. They will appreciate that you actually watched the game. Because we don't watch the games very much anymore, unfortunately. So, you got to work hard, that's obvious. You got to have a love for whatever you're doing, that's obvious also. You got to learn how to write, and that's pretty obvious. And you got to be curious. And wherever you are, just watch the veterans do their job. The most important thing I did was go work for a major daily newspaper my first year out of college. And even though I was delivering coffee and making runs for Roy Rogers at 11 o'clock at night for the writers and the desk guys, I kept my eyes open, and I looked at those writers, and I tagged along with them and said, wow, this is how you do that. This is how you present that. That's the kind of stuff that was invaluable then and remains invaluable to me today.
That's awesome.
Okay, that is awesome advice, and thank you, Mr. Kurkjian, for joining us on Sports Nerds in the Morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for
Thank
your
you
time.
so
We
much.
really appreciate it.
So,
Okay, I'm going to finish with this, fellas. You guys did a great job today. The most important and most difficult thing that I have to do in my job still is to ask a good question. And you want to get in a conversation with the person you're talking to as opposed to having get the question and answer period. This was kind of a conversation we had today. You guys did really, really well. Always concentrate on making sure you ask the best questions you can and make sure it's about the person you're talking to, not about yourselves. You guys did really well today.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
We really, it means a lot to us. And again, we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for joining Sports Nerds in the Morning.
Okay, my pleasure, fellas. Talk to you soon. See ya.
Have a good one.
All
All
right.
right, have a good one.
Oh my God.
All right, that was Mr. Tim Kurkjian. Obviously, we're really appreciative of the time he took to talk to us and to lend his baseball knowledge. For us, it was a really great experience to hear from him. We hope you, as the viewers, really enjoyed listening to a baseball expert and listening to what we had to say. So thank you so much for joining in the Sports Nerds in the Morning. We'll come at you next week with some more podcasts. Thank you, guys.